Well, the disciples had come full circle. At the beginning of Jesus' ministry, when he called them, they were at the lakeshore doing what they knew best. They were fishing. And they were doing it for the obvious reason, so as to put food on the table. But one day, Jesus came along and asked them to drop their nets and to fish for people instead. Now, fast forward 3 years. There they are again. The same disciples back at sea trying to catch fish just as they had done before. It was, as Yogi Berra would have said, deja vu all over again. And I dare say that to an observer, the scene would have looked practically identical to what it had been previously. The same sea, the same men, and more than likely the same boat. From an outsider's perspective, nothing had changed. Yet for them, everything had. Just as it changes for us after we first meet Jesus. And for the life of them, no matter what they did, it was not within their power to make things the way they had been before. Their plight reminded me of Emily Webb's, the protagonist in my all-time favorite play, Our Town, by Thornton Wilder. Remember it with me. Emily, at the age of 26, had recently died in childbirth. And against the advice of the others who had died, she asks if she might go back to Earth. The stage manager who runs everything grants her request, but tells her she is allowed to return for 1 day only, and she will not be able to intervene. Emily chooses her 12th birthday. "Good morning, Mama," says 12-year-old Emily. "Well now, my dear," says her mother, "a very happy birthday to my girl, and many happy returns. But birthday or no birthday, I want you to eat your breakfast." The whole conversation is going very routinely until at one point, Emily, despite herself, tries to interject. With urgency, she breaks in and she tells her mother, who cannot hear her, "Oh, Mama, I married George Gibbs. Don't you remember, Mama? Don't you?" Then, pleading with her unseeing mother, she says, "Mama, please, just for a moment, let's be happy. Let's look at each other." But her plea goes unheard. And feeling totally defeated, Emily asks the stage manager to let her go back to where she was before. No, as life taught the disciples and as life has taught each of us, you can't go home again. Try as we may, no one can relive the past. We may think that by now, since the disciples had already seen the resurrected Jesus, that they would be beside themselves with joy. But in reality, that wasn't the case. Yes, miraculously, they did see him risen from the dead. Yet that was fleetingly. And that wasn't the same as having him right there in their midst, the way he used to be, making the blind see and the lame walk. Reminded me a little of Topper. Do any of you remember that show, Topper? Oh, phew, good. This is a sitcom from the 50s, and what happens is Topper buys an estate of a couple, young couple, that died tragically in an accident. And so you don't remember this at all, do you? No, I didn't think so. No. Well, all right, I'll tell you then. So what happens is that only Topper can hear and see these two people. To him, they're larger than life, but not to anybody else. And so I wonder if maybe the disciples didn't feel that way about having seen Jesus. Regardless, the disciples' past had a no admittance sign over it. Can't go there. And their future? Well, frankly, that didn't look like it was going anywhere either. They had apprenticed with Jesus for 3 years. But what had they learned? Anything? They weren't prepared to teach. There was so much they themselves didn't understand. They couldn't preach. They couldn't perform miracles. Who would ever want to follow them? Jesus was the star. They were just a small bunch of followers who went where he went and did what he told them to do. No wonder Peter says, I'm going fishing. Can you blame him? They were stuck. The disciples were stuck between a past they could not re-enter and a future they had no idea how to navigate. We know what it's like to be there. If you've ever gone through a breakup or a divorce or a death of someone you love very much, we all know what it feels like to be stuck. Yet it was just at this point when the disciples knew they couldn't go backwards, but they knew they couldn't go forwards either. Just at this precise moment when everything seemed so totally pointless, the resurrected Jesus comes back to resurrect them. He's standing at the seashore, and now hear him ask a very painful question in a painful way. He says, children, he calls them. You have no fish, have you? Tempted as they might have been to respond by saying, oh, we caught one so big it would have sunk the boat to try to bring it in. But instead they answer honestly, whereupon Jesus gives them very simple advice. And listen to this. He didn't tell them to go over to the other side of the sea. He didn't ask them to try any difficult fishing technique. All he does is to tell them to cast their net on the other side of the boat. And out of sheer desperation, I'm sure, they do as he says. And voila, there are the fish. 153 of them. At that moment, John, the beloved disciple, looks up and he recognizes who it is. And back onto the shore they come. So coming back, getting out of the boat, can you imagine being in Jesus' place? Most people, I think, I myself included, would have thought, this is a prime time for a lecture. Jesus could have sat them down and said, look, I asked you to make fishers of people, and I meant it. Don't worry about feeding your stomachs. I need you to feed souls. Feed them. Feed them with my love. That's your bait. My love that is within you right now. That's all you need. It's as simple as that. This reminds me of a conversation former district superintendent Gary Shaw had. Do you remember him? He came with Lynn Campbell to the West Kennebunk Church before she began her first and very successful pastorate there. And before they walked in to be interviewed by the SPRC, she said to him in all honesty, I feel like I'm at a loss. I've never pastored a church before. I really don't know what to do. And he said, I'll tell you what to do in 2 words. Love them. But Jesus didn't use any words at all, really. Instead, the disciples came to him just as they were, wet and exhausted, famished and faint and finished, discouraged and defeated. And he so simply, he says the most welcome thing, come and have breakfast. It wasn't that long ago that they'd shared in the Last Supper. But this is different. This is the first breakfast with a brand new day stretching out before them. And many days were to follow, but what was different about them was that now the disciples were filled with what they always thought they lacked, which was compassion and courage, boldness and bravado, and yes, even an occasional miracle. But the biggest miracle was that they came to trust the sufficiency of Jesus' love. And that alone cast out their fear. This is not only the disciples' story, it is ours as well, which can happen whenever we find ourselves caught in the throes of life. In the words of Tom Bradbury's favorite theologian, Wendell Berry, hear this thought of the week. You think winter will never end, and then, when you don't expect it, when you have almost forgotten it, warmth comes, and a different light. And under the bare trees, the wildflowers bloom so thick you can't walk without stepping on them. How does that happen? It happens from learning the message of today's passage. We learn first that often when the living Christ comes to us, he is in disguise, and we can't immediately recognize him. So the next time when you experience something that feels like divine love, look harder, look longer. Secondly, when he asks of us in order to dramatically change our situation, remember that we don't have to go far afield. We can stay right where we are, but we can do things differently. Maybe he's asking us to do something as simple as saying, I'm sorry, or please, or thank you. Many a relationship has been saved by those very words. It's about doing simple things that make all the difference in the world, that make for abundant life. And lastly and thirdly, allow Jesus to meet your deepest needs and to feed you. Trust that he can do that. Today, in just a few minutes, he will make the offer again to feed each of us in the giving of bread and grape juice. And so then, may we allow his life to enter into ours and to nourish our hungry souls. In today's text, we are told that Simon Peter is in the boat, as are the Zebedee brothers, James and John, as is Nathanael, and yes, Thomas is there too. But two of the disciples, two of them are without names. Could one of them be you? Amen.